Today to have Donald Cutler join us. Donald Cutler is a graduate of Hastings School of Law in San Francisco, and he's with Cap and Cutler in Las Vegas. And just as a little introduction, so this is a class, Donald, of first and second year community college students who are interested in business, and of course, law intersects with business. So I know the topic of this chapter that we're talking about is torts. That's not a word that's familiar to a lot of people. So if you could just sort of give me an overview of torts, and then we'll talk about some specifics.
Sure, and as a heads up, my first introduction to the law was also in a business law class way back when at Cal State Fullerton, where I got my bachelor's in business administration and my master's, my MBA also.
Oh, great.
I can feel where you all are looking at this large topic trying to be fit into a semester, which we as lawyers may take 2 or 3 years to get through. A year for the torts class, you're going to get a very brief introduction in your class. So I feel for you in trying to jam in all this information into a short period of time.
Great, thanks. So if you could tell us a little bit about torts, and if you want, I could share the screen and put the outline of the topics if you want me to.
Sure. Okay. Torts is a specific area of law where the law is set up to try and compensate people for injuries received by other people's corporations, businesses, or governments with money. Unfortunately, in certain situations where somebody is injured, you can't erase the pain, you can't replace a finger, you can't do those things. And so the only way to compensate people for injuries they received is typically with money. If you want to go way back into history, you can go back to the Old Testament. Some of our current tort laws actually go back to that time. For instance, if you have a dog on your property, whether it's a guard dog or a pet, and that pet or that dog bites somebody, you can go back to the Old Testament where if you had a bull and your bull gored somebody the second time, the first time you wouldn't be aware of it, so it wasn't foreseeable that that bull could hurt somebody. The second time you were aware that you should do something to protect people from that bull. So that foreseeability is very important in tort law. You have to be able to know that and be on notice that, hey, something bad could happen here.
Okay, could you tell us about some interesting case that you've worked on?
I'm currently working on a case right now where 2 gentlemen were working at a business. They were outside contractors doing electrical work on a panel. Apparently at some time previously, somebody had worked on that panel who did not complete the job sufficiently, left a couple of bolts up on a ledge. Those bolts then fell down, crossed 2 connection points, and blew an arc that burned them and injured them very badly. We're looking at, in that case, who left the bolts there, who's responsible for those, and whether my clients also are partially negligent, comparatively negligent, it's called in the law.
Okay. So how about a famous case?
One case that I love, and actually that is something that you can all read about, that goes back into the 60s and the beginning really of class actions in torts and torts getting its reputation. Personal injury law is another way to put it, is the Corvair case, where Corvair has had a habit of making U-turns on their own because they were rear heavy. And so that's the Ralph Nader case in the book Unsafe at Any Speed, which is still available. And so that case to me kind of brings it all together in responsibility, accountability. The company was sued. And then, of course, following that, more recent cases of similar natures where people just didn't plan ahead, or in the Ford Pinto case where the Pintos got rear-ended and caught fire, was an extremely negligent act on Ford's part in saying, we want to save a little bit of money. and we're not going to make this as safe as we could.
Mhm.
And they actually got caught because they left a smoking gun, the note that said, yeah, we're well aware that this could be dangerous, but we're going to save a few bucks here and there. And Ford again did it with the Ford Explorer rollover cases,
Right.
where they decided to go with a cheaper tire with less plies. I believe that was the cause.
Mhm.
Tires blew out, and the Fords rolled over.
Yeah, I often talk about the Ford Pinto case in my classes because that was a case where they knew, even when it started happening and people started dying, they actually internally made a decision, well, we'll pay less money in legal fees than recalling them and fixing them, so we'll just keep paying. And then ultimately, of course, they didn't have any choice. So great. So I'd like to do, if I could, is just share the screen, and then don't feel like you have to talk about every topic, but maybe just a few of the topics under torts.
Sure.
Oops, wrong one. Get over here. There we go. Okay, so really basically the two, whoops, it skipped. So skip back to the top. So let me get back down to torts. Just a little more. So there's the three about torts. So any of those topics you'd like to talk about would be fine.
Sure. Since I do personal injury, most of what we do is negligence.
Mm-hmm.
In order to prove your case in negligence, there's two basic things you have to show. First, that somebody did something wrong, that they were negligent. In order to show that they were wrong, you have to show first they had a duty. They had a duty to either act
Mm-hmm.
or not do something. So in business law, premises liability is a big area. You have to keep your store safe. If you leave things on the floor, you need to make sure that they're either marked off or they're cleaned up so that people don't slip.
Right.
We know that if there's water on the floor, especially the typical floor in a store, which is tile, it could be slippery and somebody could get injured. So that's your foreseeability. You have a duty to make sure it's safe. If you breach that duty by allowing it not to be safe under certain conditions, so for instance, if I'm walking through the store and I spill something, and a few seconds later you walk behind me and turn that corner and slip on it, there's no way for the store to have acted quickly enough. So even though it's foreseeable, they didn't breach their duty because the evidence shows they did not have the opportunity to be on notice of that particular spill and to safeguard against it. Now, in Nevada, and I believe many other states, they treat the produce section differently because everybody knows that things hit the floor. People touch things, they taste things, they drop things. So you'll notice that in the produce section, they do things to make it safer, knowing that things hit the floor there. So they have, in some stores, they have what are called grape mats. So it's a rubber mat with holes in it, so grapes or cherries or smaller items fall into the holes and don't become a danger. Some will put carpet into the produce section so that it's less slippery, or a different flooring surface to protect against people slipping. That's the first part. Duty and breach make negligence. The next part are the damages. What are the injuries? And causation is the other part. You have to show that the injuries that the person is claiming are caused by the accident, the fall, for instance, and not by some other cause, something that was already there, something that happened later. So damages fall again into two basic things. There are two basic classifications. There are general damages. That's what everybody thinks of as pain and suffering. And there are special damages. Those are things that I can specify. So medical bills, time lost from work. If a person has to replace labor, so if a person takes care of the home and they have to hire somebody to clean the house, those kind of things that I can put a number to, those are special damages. General damages, again, is what we think of as pain and suffering, how the accident affects the person's life as opposed to how it affects their body. I use a very extreme example. Where a lot of people think, well, you take the medical bills, you multiply it by 3, and that's the value of the case. Well, that might be a general rule to start with. let's say the professor and I are driving in a car. We're both passengers, so neither of us could be at fault. There's no liability issue. We get into an accident, regardless of who caused it. Here's what the damages are. The professor has a kink in his back. It bothers him. It annoys him. He doesn't lose any time from work. And a month later, it goes away and never bothers him again. So he's got $1,000, say, in medical bills and treatment bills. That's one item of damage. The other is, what's the value of, yeah, it bugged me for a month. Not a lot of value there. I, on the other hand, something happens, say in the accident, a piece of the glass shatters, and it goes into my eye, and it takes out the eye. And they say, Don, you're never going to see out of that eye again. Here's your bill for $1,000. I have the same medical damages, the same bill. But what's the value of loss of an eye for life? Well, again, it depends on what I do. Being an attorney, I read a lot. People who play sports need their stereo vision. They need both their eyes to get depth of field. So it's going to affect them in that. It may take somebody out of the ability to do a job. But looking again at the effect on their life, their activities, let's say you have somebody who has a good eye and a bad eye. If it takes out the bad eye, okay, it's really not that much difference to them. But if it takes out the good eye, now they're basically blind. What's the value of that? Certainly the value of those two cases are not the same, even though the medical bills are the same. So you have to look at each person's specific damages when it comes to those pain and suffering damages. How did it affect that particular person?
Okay, thank you. So I'm going to stop sharing the screen, and then I have two last questions for you. There's a growing awareness of the historical subjugation of African Americans and other groups. And I'd like to ask you, just in general, do you think business law has played a role in this in any way?
I think it has. In the civil rights area, you know, the civil rights area, of course, affects business, how people should be treated, how things happen. Even within, let's say, the workers' compensation field, yeah, you have to make sure that the places are safe, and that's kind of related to torts. But when it comes to the field of torts, now you can get into some more specific areas that would affect minorities specifically. So one of the things that you have to deal with are things like slander, defamation, and in personal injury, there's two specific causes of action: negligent infliction of emotional distress and intentional infliction of emotional distress. So those two things can be used as tools to prevent companies or workers or others from abusing people either negligently, just by failing to address them, or intentionally would be more likely the case that an employee or a company was specifically not allowing a minority to shop in their store, or to treat them differently, or to say, which we've seen in many cases, threaten them with arrest because they believe they committed some crime, or they believe they were doing something wrong merely based on the color of their skin. So if you could prove that, then you could say, look, this is either negligent or intentional negligent or intentional infliction of emotional distress, based on the fact that what you did reasonably foreseeably led to that person being affected emotionally, as opposed to physically. Now, in some cases, depending on the state, you have to show some physical manifestation of the emotional distress, which could be nothing but, hey, I went outside and I got nauseated by the way I was treated. Nausea is a physical manifestation of an emotional injury for which it's proof that happened. Obviously, merely stating, you know, hey, that guy treated me badly isn't going to be enough. Otherwise, the law would be useless if it's too easy to sue.
Okay. So I think you've already partially or maybe completely answered my other question, but how do you, just in case there's anything else you want to say, how do you think business law could be used to address institutionalized racism?
Again, I think making sure that people are treated properly. I think those kind of vigilant actions can be used to enforce, and of course, all the civil rights laws and enforcing those. Same thing with employment law. Certainly, the employment law and the discrimination portions of that, which is an area I don't practice in, but I certainly know enough that employment law provides that employees should be treated equally, without regard for the color of their skin, their religion, anything of that nature. So yeah, those areas of law could be used also to ensure equal treatment under the law.
Well, Don, thanks again. Well, let's just see if there's anything else you want to talk about before we wrap up.
No, it's interesting that business law, again, is so broad, covers so many areas, because the law does touch us all more than we may realize until we see it.
Right.
Statutes are out there, and sometimes you could be liable for injuring somebody without getting, let's say, a citation or that, because you just have to prove that, yeah, it should have been something that wasn't done. And so there's an area called negligence per se, so that if somebody violates a law in a way that was meant to protect the person that was injured, that then you are negligent without having to prove it. Just proving that the violation occurred is enough.
Okay, well, thanks again. Like I say, I'm very grateful to you for joining with us. I think I'm not an attorney, and so it's terrific that we can have attorneys speak to the class about the topics that they're most knowledgeable in. I have recorded this. I will post the link. I'll send it to you, and I'll send it to the class. And again, I just want to thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, and I hope everybody enjoys this. If anybody has any questions, the professor knows how to get a hold of me.
Okay, terrific. Thank you so much. Well, you just let them know, but I'll certainly let them know. Thanks again.
Thank you.
Goodbye.